This sharpening stone might look like a very mundane object, and it really is if you think about it, but at the same time, it was absolutely essential. Almost everyone in the Viking Age possessed one. Whetstones might have even played a role in kicking off the Viking Age itself because they were mass produced and they traveled a lot. So, long distance trade networks from as far as the Arctic regions of Norway to locations like the trading town of Ribe in Denmark, well before the traditionally accepted date of Viking expansion, might have played a pivotal role in creating the economic and political conditions that led to the Viking Age. Let's explain. So the Viking Age is often dated to the later half of the 8th century, towards the end of it, but this is rather done for convenience reasons. Historically, it does really make sense. Rarely do we have precise dates for complex historical processes. At any rate, it refers to the raids they start committing in Western Europe. This has largely been examined in terms of sociopolitical and cultural causes, largely long term causes. One very important factor insisted upon lately is, for example, the political landscape, which would have been very fragmented and very violent. So, if you wanted to gain fortune and fame, you would have been better off exploring and plundering other realms. However, the more immediate or triggering factors for the onset of the Viking raids remain a little underexplored due to the lack of direct evidence. We do have the connection to the silver rush in the east, for example. This would have led to the acquisition of immense quantities of Arabic dirhams, but then there was a decline in the 9th century, and this would have encouraged a more systematic exploitation of the West. But this is later on in the 9th century. However, newly available geological analyses of traded materials, specifically of whetstones, might offer some more concrete data to reassess this question. Whetstones were among the most important and common tools used by the Norse. They were necessary for sharpening a wide array of implements, including weapons such as spears and knives and swords and axes, as well as needles and other tools with cutting edges or points. In a society that was largely dependent on crafts, on hunting, warfare, the ability to maintain sharp tools and weapons was crucial. And high quality whetstones required specific rock types containing small, hard mineral grains that acted as abrasives, and the Norwegian ones seem to have been very well suited for the task. Recent studies have used archaeological stratigraphy, petrographic microscopy, as well as geochemical analysis to establish the provenance of whetstones unearthed in the town of Ribe in Denmark. The objective of the studies was to identify the geographical origins of these artifacts and, by extension, to reconstruct the trade routes and socio-political networks that linked Western Scandinavia to southern Jutland in the 8th and early 9th century. Ribe is located in southwestern Jutland or Jylland in Denmark, and it is the oldest known town in Scandinavia with continuous activity from about 705 AD. It served as a key hub for trade between Scandinavians and Frisians. Among the 446 Weststone fragments recovered here, a significant proportion can be traced to quarries in Trøndelag in central Norway, particularly Mustadmarka near Lade. This was confirmed via petrographic and geochemical analysis. Stones of a very fine grained schist from here appear in Ribe as early as the 720s. And then we also have stones from Eidsborg, the light grey schist. They begin appearing slightly later but grow in prominence from the early 9th century. There's also a third category biotite schist with an unknown origin. First of all, visual features such as grain size, color ranging from purple to gray, as well as surface texture were used as preliminary diagnostic criteria. However, due to the small size of many fragments, it was not feasible to subject all of the samples to the same analytical procedures. So some of the samples underwent petrographic analysis through thin section microscopy, while others were analyzed for their geochemical composition using X-ray fluorescence. The petrographic analysis involved preparing thin sections from the stone samples and comparing their mineral composition and microstructures to those from 11 known Norwegian quarry sites. The main focus was to identify key characteristics such as the type and orientation of mica flakes, quartz content, and grain fineness. The analysis successfully matched the light grey schist to the Eidsbjørk quarries in Telemark, and more significantly, it established that the very fine grained schist whetstones found near Ribe matched the lithology of rocks from the Mostadsmarka quarries near the city of Trondheim. To complement the petrography analysis, whole rock geochemical analysis was used to measure major element concentrations such as silicon dioxide. The values were then plotted to differentiate stone types and establish clusters based on quarry origin. The geochemical signatures of the light grained schists again confirmed the Eidsborg origin, while the very fine grained schists clustered tightly with reference samples from Mostadsmarka. Finally, the archaeological phase data from Ribe was integrated with the geological findings. That means the stratigraphy of the two excavations was phased using dendrochronology and artifactual typology, enabling to track the appearance and frequency of West Scandinavian whetstones over time. In conclusion, what are the main findings? It turns out that by 760, over 50% of the whetstones in Ribe were of Norwegian origin. By about 790 800, the percentage even rose to 75, indicating a peak in Norwegian stone imports. These trends align closely with the earliest evidence we have of other Arctic commodities, such as reindeer antler, which was very useful for producing combs and other objects. This peak coincides with heightened trade in the Skagerrak region and the North Sea in general, as well as the founding of the trading town of Kaupang around the year 800. Western Norway largely lacked towns or formal markets until the late 10th century, when, for example, Trondheim was founded by Olaf Tryggvason. There was a marketplace, a small marketplace there before, but its development dates back to the 10th century. Trade in the 8th century, on the other hand, was rather aristocratically controlled and long distance in nature, bypassing local market structures. The Hålogaland and Trøndelag elites operated from manors such as in Lade, sourcing goods either locally, like whetstones, and from indigenous markets, indigenous northern peoples. And here we have the examples of antlers and furs. Commodities were then shipped towards the south, along the coast, then to the Northern Sea, towards markets such as Ribe and Hedeby, afterwards bypassing towns and relying largely on aristocratic networks. So, what do these new discoveries show us? Well, they show us that Viking raids should not only be understood through long term causes alone, but also through the decisions made by actors which were shaped by contemporary conditions. Traders needed safe passage and peace to maximize profits. Raiders, on the other hand, thrived on disruption and plunder, but piracy reduced overall trade profitability and led to countermeasures by some kings and chieftains. From the late 8th century, stronger royal authorities, such as King Horik in Denmark, the kings of Rogaland, and so on, sought to regulate trade and suppress piracy, but they were not always successful. Paradoxically, kings also had an interest in benefiting from trade and sometimes tolerated and employed raiders themselves. To a great extent, the Viking Age started out as a reaction to reduced opportunities at home. We have the push factor, so that meant royal suppression of local trading, increased production, and protection of traders, and this would have curtailed the profits for independent warriors. So they didn't have access to valuable trade commodities any longer or royal patronage, so that meant many turned to raiding abroad. They were up for the grabs, so to speak. Initial attacks were scattered, so you have the coast of England and then Scotland, the Irish Sea, and after 800, the focus shifted towards Ireland and Scotland even more, possibly due to lighter resistance and the avoidance of key trade zones in the Channel. And then from the mid 9th century onwards, Viking fleets even began overwintering in Ireland and then also in France and England. So this allowed larger and coordinated attacks and reduced home base royal control. The older view of the Viking Age presented as a sudden eruption of violence, but it really was an interplay of multiple factors. You have material drivers, such as this trade in Arctic goods like whetstones, antler, and soapstone. There is political change involved, the centralization of authority in regions such as Rogaland, Hordaland, Denmark, and so on. And then you also have the agent based choices, really. Traders, kings, and Viking ship commanders navigating opportunity, profit, and constraint. So raiding emerged not as the antithesis of trade, but also as an adaptive response to shifting trade dynamics. I mean, if you think about the word Viking itself, it means largely raiding, but it also involved some other side activities, whichever was best depending on the context. The importance of Wetstones in the story of the Vikings can also be found in one little tale from Old Norse mythology, where a whetstone is given an etiological character, meaning it is used to explain the origin of all whetstones in the world. This is the myth of Hruknir and Thor, and it describes a whetstone shattering in battle, potentially also highlighting the understanding of certain rock types. At any rate, the mythological context indicates that they were not merely practical tools, but might also have had some sort of deeper cultural and symbolic meaning. Hrungnir is distinctively a stone jotun or giant with a heart of hard stone. Some have speculatively associated with a symbol called the Valknuter. For more on that, watch my latest video. And he also had a head and weapon also made of stone. His name might mean brawler or something like that. So upon reaching Oscarder, the realm of the Aesir, he becomes intoxicated, issues very severe threats to the Aesir. He boasts that he will move Valhall to the land of the giants, that he would destroy Oscarder and drink all the mead of the gods, and also abduct the goddesses Freya and Siv. His threat to bury Oscarder is quite unique and might be a slight reference to an earthquake. Then he throws his stone whetstone weapon at Thor, but Mjolnir shatters it in midair. However, a fragment of this whetstone becomes lodged in Thor's head, and he can only get it out by resorting to a sorceress. As you can see, this myth also presents whetstones as being something quite powerful and worth having. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, consider not only subscribing but also joining the channel. Memberships would really help me with the research and production, and you also get several perks, including members-only posts, videos. This also includes a mini dictionary of Norse mythology, and yeah, you also get my eternal gratitude. I'll put in a very good word for you with Thor, Odin, and Freyr. Thank you so much, and till next time.